If you could draft any player all time to start your franchise with, who would it be? I've seen this topic covered many times on shows like First Take, but rarely does anything productive come of the discussion. It usually just devolves into a screaming match on who is the greatest player of all time. But that isn't the question. The question is, knowing what we know now, who would be the easiest player in NBA history to build a dynasty around? And the answers to those two questions aren't necessarily the same. There's just so much missing context to what it means to draft one of these players in terms of how their career played out and what that means from a team building perspective. So over the course of this series, I will be laying out the case, both positive and negative, for a handful of players that I think have an interesting case to be considered for this hypothetical number one overall pick. Obviously, if anyone has any suggestions for a player or players that they would like to see covered, please let me know down in the comment section. But in order for us to have a nuanced and intelligent conversation on this topic, we have to lay out a scenario or a set of ground rules. 1, we are the only team picking from the all-time pool. Rule 2, we only get one pick. Rule 3, the rest of the roster is made up of competent NBA role players. Rule 4, this is for the modern era of basketball. Rule 5, players' careers will play out relatively similarly. Rule 6, players grew up in their own era, time traveled to ours, and will need to be developed for modern basketball. If you want a further or more in-depth explanation of the rules, please check out the introduction video of this series.
With the first pick in the 2003 NBA Draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers select LeBron James.
I think the best player to kick this series off with is LeBron James. He's one of the most common players I see tossed out there in this debate, and for good reason. He has an incredibly strong claim to the GOAT throne, and in terms of production and longevity, no one even comes close. I mean, here we are in year 20, he's still putting up monster numbers, still undoubtedly a top 10 player in the league. And even though eye test wise, there are starting to be some signs that he's slowing down a little bit, you would never know it from just looking at his statistics. And I certainly think he's going to be able to continue around this level for at least a couple more years. And I don't think it's completely inconceivable that he could keep this pace up for another 5 years. And outside of that, just as a prospect, knowing what we know now and how his career plays out, there really isn't any weaknesses to his game, even though I wouldn't say that he's the best in NBA history at any particular skill set. I also don't think that there's really any skill set that he doesn't have. He's just kind of good at everything. The positives for LeBron's case for this hypothetical number one pick are so obvious they almost aren't even worth mentioning, particularly the statistical argument. And that's typically the direction that I see shows like First Take go. Shannon Sharp or Kendrick Perkins, whoever, they just kind of scream their heads off at the opposition about longevity and statistics. But the rules that I laid out for this series don't just look at the raw numbers. It also factors in who they were as a player on the court and how you build around them, but also the player that they were in the locker room and within your organization and how that affects team building. That second part, that off-court part with LeBron, is really what inspired this series. So let's start unpacking his career and see how it impacts things from an organizational perspective, both positive and negative. And then towards the end, I want to just break down how I would choose to build a team around him and plan around LeBron James as if he were drafted today, knowing what we know now. So looking at the beginning of LeBron's career, he basically becomes the player that he would be for his entire career, at least production-wise, by year 2. He's 27, 7-7 in year 2, and that's pretty much what he's been his entire career, and it seems like that's exactly what he's going to be until the end of time. His rookie season is really the only statistical outlier, and even that season for him, it was very historic. As of today, he's only one of 5 players in league history to average 25-5 their rookie season. That puts him with Luka, MJ, Oscar Robertson, and Tyreke Evans. Shout out to Tyreke. I'm probably going to have to make a video on him at some point, one of my favorite players. But that's all sounding very positive, right? Well, not necessarily. A player reaching their potential ahead of schedule is a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yeah, it's great to have a guy that's capable of putting up numbers year in and year out that would put him in an MVP conversation depending on the team's success. One of the hardest things to do in the league is find one of those guys, and we've really never seen anyone maintain that type of level of that play for 19 plus years. However, it does really limit your options in terms of building through the draft, because obviously if you have someone playing at an MVP level, you're going to win a handful of games no matter how bad the rest of the team is, and it just prevents you from completely bottoming out. And with the rules that we laid out, we have a competent roster of role players, but we don't have anyone that's going to develop into more than that. And LeBron, for my money, is the greatest floor raiser of teams in the history of the league. And until very recently, it never really mattered who else was on the team. You were all but guaranteed at least a trip to the second round in the playoffs as long as he was on the team. And even in the first few years of LeBron's career, he was already having a tremendous and huge impact on winning. If you look at the 2003 Cavs, they finished the year 17-65. Ahead of drafting LeBron. That's pretty putrid, and it wasn't the case of injuries just derailing their season. Ricky Davis basically plays a full season. Ilgauskas played all but one game. Carlos Boozer also only missed a single game. It just wasn't a talented roster, and it wasn't a roster that made a lot of sense in terms of fit. Fast forward to the 2004 season, LeBron's rookie year, and the team almost doubles their win total from the prior year, with the only meaningful change to the core of that team being the addition of LeBron and the fact that Ricky Davis missed most of the season. Granted, not all of that credit goes to LeBron. Some of the team's success can be attributed to Carlos Boozer taking a pretty big leap. But even if you're a huge skeptic of LeBron, you can't say that he didn't have a major impact on the winning of this team right away. And for further proof of that, let's move on to the 2005 season, LeBron's second year. The Cavs take another huge leap. They finish 42-40. And now we do start to see some pretty significant roster shakeups. Gone is Ricky Davis and gone is Carlos Boozer, fresh off of finessing his way off of the Cavs and onto the Utah Jazz. So the team gets worse, and yet their record improves, and that's precisely what a generational talent can do for your franchise. During LeBron's first stint in Cleveland, outside of his rookie year, the team finishes above 500 every season, including a season where they win 61 games and 66 games, and a finals appearance in there. And despite all of that success, the narrative surrounding this era of the LeBron Cavs is that he never had any help, and that was true. And while I wouldn't say that the Cavs organization did a great job of surrounding LeBron with a competent team, I would also say I don't know how much better any other front office could have done under very similar circumstances. Cleveland was never going to be a free agent destination, so signing a true co-star was off the table. That left them with options like overpaying guys like Larry Hughes in free agency, or taking flyers on aging stars like Shaq, Ben Wallace, Antoine Jameson while they were on their way out of the league. The Dallas Mavericks are currently experiencing a very similar set of circumstances where Luka was just way too good way too soon, and they didn't get the chance to build a young core of players who could grow around Luka. Dallas, to a lesser extent than Cleveland, has also had a lot of issues luring stars through free agency, so when you can't draft a star and you can't acquire one through free agency, you're left with really only one other option, and that's the swing for the fences type trade that the Dallas Mavericks tried to pull off when they traded for Porzingis in an attempt to make him the co-star alongside Luka. And since that didn't work, now the Mavs are left with very little in the way of assets, be it players that teams might be interested in trading for or just draft capital in general. Everything they have was used to acquire Porzingis, and today I just don't see a lot of outs for them with what they currently have. They're kind of left with two options here. It's either be patient and wait for some cap room to clear up and potentially annoy Luka to the point where he might eventually leave through free agency or demand a trade, or continue to make those high risk swing for the fences type trades and risk digging an even deeper hole for yourself asset wise. It's almost identical to what the Cavs went through with LeBron, and it's going to be a problem for our hypothetical team as well. As I mentioned, the rules were starting with a group of competent role players And I would argue that those early Cavs teams were not competent in the slightest. So we could experience even more early success, preventing us from getting any meaningful players to the draft. If this hypothetical team isn't in a premier location like New York, Miami, LA, we can rule out signing a star free agent, which kind of leaves us with similar options to what the Dallas Mavericks has, and that's wait on a disgruntled star to become available via trade and then cash in all of our chips to acquire them. Even if that move works out, it's going to limit the way we can build out the rest of the roster. We would basically just have to make shrewd free agent signings and take on some bad contracts from teams looking to shed salary. And that segues me into the next thing I want to talk about with LeBron, and that's how you build a team around him. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Despite how difficult the Lakers are making it look, building a team around LeBron is not rocket science. Really, all you need to do is line the court up with shooters, give him a pick and roll partner, and then ideally you have a guard who can do some spotting up and run the offense when LeBron is on the bench or just wants to take a few possessions off, but that isn't even a requirement, that part. So that's a good thing, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The template has already been made, and it's super obvious the type of players that will and will not work alongside LeBron. Another really great thing is that despite the fact that LeBron seems to add a new piece to his game every year, from a team building perspective, he's relatively the same player that he's always been. Meaning the types of players that would have helped young LeBron drive a team to success are the same types of players that would help an older LeBron drive a team to success. So again, that's super great. Throughout his career, we're not going to have to drastically alter the construction of the team or our play style, anything like that. But like LeBron becoming so great so early, this can also work as a double-edged sword. I mentioned how the template has already been created for building a team around LeBron. And while it's great that we don't have to figure that out on the fly or invent something new from scratch, this is the only template. Despite LeBron being such a Swiss Army knife as a player, able to pretty much do it all, that doesn't translate to the types of players that you can have around him, and more importantly, the types of co-stars that you could put around him. He is just such a great playmaker and just such a great player in general. You want him making as many decisions as possible for your basketball team, but that ball dominance can suck the life out of a co-star. In a lot of ways, LeBron is the progenitor of the heliocentric offenses that we see the Mavs running today and the Hawks, and then what we saw the Rockets run during the James Harden days. And in my opinion, those teams have all been sold a false bill of goods by LeBron because I just don't think that style of basketball is very successful. When you play that way, you can only go as far as your best player can take you. They can't afford to have an off night or get tired because everything runs through them. So if they stop, the whole team stops. And with Harden, Luka, and Trey, the best case scenario for players like that, as good as they are, seems to be the conference finals before they get tired or break down or start to string together some bad games. LeBron is just such a freak and is so durable that he can win a title this way. He can do it almost all on his own. But in my opinion, this is the primary reason why he has 4 championships in 20 years versus 8. And why we've only seen LeBron-led teams exceed 60 wins 3 times in his career. The way that he plays just doesn't leave enough breathing room for a lot of his co-stars over the years to maintain an all-NBA level. And thus, when the playoffs roll around, they don't have enough reps to pick up LeBron when he has an off night or combine with LeBron for like a 60, 70-point night when the other team is really rolling. That's what made Kyrie such a great duo partner for LeBron, is he could take the reins from LeBron when it was required, but he could also just go stand in the corner and spot up when that was needed. The Wade fit was a little clunky because he wasn't a spot up type player, but Wade was able to add some off ball cutting to make himself a better fit alongside LeBron. This is also why the Russell Westbrook thing has been a total disaster, because he can't play well without the ball and he can't shoot. So that leaves very little room for him to operate alongside LeBron. Kevin Love became an extremely limited version of himself just to fit LeBron, being reduced to basically a corner 3-point shooter after being a fairly dominant post player in Minnesota. Same with Chris Bosh. Throughout his stint with Toronto and early on in Miami, generated his offense out of the post, but he eventually developed the 3-point shot just to fit what LeBron needed. As I mentioned, LeBron is the ultimate floor raiser, but that style of play does have a ceiling on it, and it can be suffocating as another star player trying to fit alongside LeBron. It really just boils down to, if you're on a LeBron-led team, you're going to get some wide open shots, but LeBron just isn't the type of player who opens up the floor for others. He doesn't command a lot of off-ball gravity the way that somebody like Steph Curry does. It's why over the years we've seen breakout performances from guys like Boobie Gibson, Mike Miller, and old J.R. Smith. If you're the type of player who can take advantage of wide open standing jump shots, you're going to be in basketball heaven. But if you're someone like Wade or Westbrook and you need the ball to create, it can become basketball hell very quickly. That leads me to the other big issue with modern team building around LeBron, and that's finding 3-and-D players to fill out the roster. If this were 2003, where shooting as a skill set wasn't valued, it would be easy to create a roster full of shooters. But today, every team in the league wants those guys. So today, you can't just round out the roster with quality defenders and shooters like you could even 10 years ago. The next thing I want to just briefly touch on is just how involved LeBron is with front office affairs. You pretty much are going to have to consult with him on every decision, and sometimes he will really push for certain trades or certain signings, and in a lot of cases these moves haven't been for the benefit of the team. LeBron as a player is an all-time great, but LeBron the GM, on the other hand, I think it's the less said about him the better. Now, in one of my earliest videos, I defended LeBron on the over-meddling and combative approach he takes with the front office. Cleveland early on gave him very little reason to have any faith in a front office. When he gets there, it's just a complete mess. And some of the first actions he sees this front office take in Cleveland is bungling the Carlos Boozer contract situation. And then after his rookie season, they take Luke Jackson with the 10th pick, who played 4 seasons in the league and appeared in less than 1 season's worth of games. After that, it's just an endless cycle of washed up star players who are meant to be the co-star alongside LeBron. So he had every reason not to trust front offices and to want a say in decision making. So maybe if a different team had won the lottery in 2003, or Cleveland just had a competent GM in place, maybe he learns to trust the front office and isn't as involved in personnel decisions. I think that's totally possible. However, for the sake of this exercise, we're going to assume that he's just as hands-on for our hypothetical team as he is today in front office matters. And we have seen that when LeBron doesn't get his way or the basketball situation becomes bleak, LeBron will leave for greener pastures. And under the current rules of this exercise, that means that LeBron is going to leave after that second contract, because we're assuming that whoever we draft, their career is going to play out in a very similar manner. And like the GM thing that I had mentioned, like where if he has a competent front office, maybe he isn't as hands-on. I think if Cleveland had showed themselves to be competent early on, I don't think he leaves for Miami. But those aren't the rules for this exercise, so we're going to assume that he's going to leave. So at minimum, we would have had 5 years with LeBron for our team, maximum 9 before he leaves for the first time. It's most likely 8 or 9. 5 would require him to take the qualifying offer after his rookie deal and become an unrestricted free agent after that. We really haven't seen anybody do that yet. And as unhappy as Zion was with his situation, that's just too much money to leave on the table and risk having something bad happen when you haven't had your big contract yet. So I think after the rookie deal, we can safely assume that LeBron would sign a 4 or 5 year max extension. So let's just assume he'll go for that 5 years. So that's 9 years before he leaves, and then he leaves for 4 years and comes back for another 4 years before he leaves forever. So we get 13 years with LeBron, 12 of which are in his prime production wise. So that's about as good of a window as you can hope for with any player. And since we know that LeBron leaves after the second contract and then ultimately returns, we can use that to our advantage. Also, who knows, after this Lakers stint is done, he might come back to Cleveland for a third run, so maybe this video becomes outdated in a few years, but until then, let's just assume that 13 years is the window that we have with him. And really, in spite of a lot of the negative points I've raised in taking LeBron as the starting piece, The positives are just so glaring and obvious that it might not dissuade you from taking him number one in this hypothetical draft. LeBron is a player who's capable of being the best player on a finals team by basically year 2 on, and is that player for his entire career. So for the purposes of us, that means 12 years of a player who could potentially be the best player on a finals team. Also, he never gets hurt during that time. And because he's such a floor raiser, even if we have a number 2 option that gets hurt, the team is still going to be able to thrive and survive throughout that injury. Sure, he leaves us, but we can plan around that and use those 4 years that he's in Miami as a way to restock on draft picks and retool the team. So let's say we've made our decision. We're starting our expansion team with LeBron, and we're going to take him in the 2023 draft. So what does that mean, and what does this look like? The developmental piece is something that I want to discuss with every player that I cover during this series, but with respect to LeBron, I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible, since it really isn't hard to imagine LeBron playing in modern basketball and how he would fit there, since we can just kind of turn on our TV and see it in real time. And I'm going to assume that I can't fundamentally alter who he is as a player. If I could, this is kind of how I would do it. I would really want to move him away from the need to be a ball dominant player and focus on making him more of a threat without the ball, sort of like the way that the Nuggets use Jokic, except, with one of the best athletes in the history of our planet. And LeBron's basketball IQ, passing ability, almost unmatched even in a historical context. So I would choose to leverage that still, but just in a different way, getting him the ball in tons of different spots on the floor and asking him to make quick decisions with the ball rather than dribble the air out of it at the top of the key. In my opinion, this would unlock LeBron the most, because as it stands right now, he really only commands gravity when he has the ball. But if you had to worry about him getting the ball in the post, at the elbow, on the wing, top of the key, cut to the basket, etc., now he has a ton of gravity without the ball too. Right now, you really don't have to look for LeBron as a defense when he doesn't have the ball, because you pretty much know where he's going to be. He's going to be at the top of the key. Also, if we got him moving around a lot more, it would allow him to take advantage of that bigger, faster, stronger body that makes him so dangerous. Say you want to put a guard or a wing on him, fine. He can kill you in the post. You want to find somebody who can match his size and strength, great. Have fun keeping up with him on the wing. Jokic is proving that you don't have to have the ball all the time to put up MVP type numbers, or at least have the ball for as much time. And I think LeBron could be even more effective than Jokic is in a very similar role. Also, it totally negates the negative team building points I brought up earlier. It allows LeBron to open up the floor for his co-stars and play with a much more diverse cast of role players. So now, instead of just a few certain archetypes that work alongside LeBron, he can pretty much play with anyone. But as I said, that pretty much fundamentally changes who he is as a player. The example I gave for developing players for modern basketball in the intro was teaching Larry Bird a few modern cuts and having him shoot a few more threes. That's a pretty minor change, so let's just assume that we can't drastically alter who LeBron is as a player, and let's assume he becomes the more ball-dominant player that he is today. I still do think there would be some minor changes. Obviously, the three-point shot, I think he develops this much earlier on, and it's likely at the expense of his post-game. Back in 2003, I've mentioned, honestly, the three-pointer was still kind of seen as a bad shot, so there was really no rush for LeBron to develop this. And he really didn't put much emphasis on developing that shot until mid-Miami run. So in today's game, he would develop that much earlier on. The other change I could see is in his playmaking. Back in 2003, we still had these really structured and rigid, defined positions where specific positions had specific roles for the team. Today, honestly, positions seem almost outdated, and the position someone plays doesn't limit the role that they can have on the team. So there would have been a lot more openness to have LeBron handle the ball as if he were a point guard. So with more reps and ball handling duties earlier on, it might even result in our hypothetical LeBron being a better passer and playmaker than the one we see in real life. As for the actual direction of the team, well, I think year one, the 2023-2024 season, That's the only year we can tank. It's LeBron's rookie year. It's the only year that he doesn't play at an all NBA level. So let's try our best to take advantage of that and get us the best draft pick possible. It's safe to say that we won't have the top pick based on how impactful even rookie LeBron was to the Cavs in terms of their winning. But I think with some selective load management and trading off that solid group of competent role players that we have, we can still get into that 8 to 10 pick in the draft range. And when we trade those role players, the aim is to acquire future draft picks, not draft picks that we plan on to actually use to draft players, but future assets that we can use in future trades. Maybe in the 2024 draft, we get lucky and we can find a superstar to co-star alongside LeBron. But I think for the sake of being realistic, let's just say that we draft a solid rotational piece, the type of guy who can start for like 10 years. Think somebody like JJ Redick or Terrence Ross. Those were guys who were drafted in that range and have had really solid careers. The rest of the 2024 offseason is when we really start to make our moves. As I mentioned, from year 2 on, LeBron is just too good to tank. So we really aren't going to be able to be patient and build through the draft. So our first logical step is to find a co-star who could fit well alongside LeBron. And while it would be great to pick up someone who can grow alongside our young LeBron James, teams aren't typically trading away future superstars who are in that 19 to 23-year-old range. Also, I'm going to assume that the super duper stars, aka like the top 10 guys in the league, like Giannis, Luka, Tatum, I'm assuming that they don't become available. They don't become disgruntled with their situation. I'm also going to assume that we aren't a free agent destination, A, as a new franchise, and B, we likely wouldn't be put into New York, Miami, or Los Angeles. So that means we're going to have to trade for one. And since we know that LeBron is going to be leaving in now 8 years, we can use that to our advantage and look for guys who are going to be aging out towards the end of that time frame, so we can really tank and acquire some really nice assets during that second 4-year window with LeBron. So really what we're looking for is someone in their mid-20s who's not really capable of being the number one guy on a title team and who is also in a bit of a distressed situation. It also needs to be someone who can play well without the ball, and most importantly, who can shoot. And in order for us to trade for one, they also have to be disgruntled enough to demand a trade. So looking at the scoring leaders this season, I think this is entirely speculative, but I think there's a handful of players who could become kind of fussy with their situation in the next few years, who are also in their mid-20s. SGA and Trae Young are 2 players that come to mind who are nearly at the top of that list. Oklahoma City has been losing for years. So if that doesn't start to change here very soon, I could see where SGA could become very frustrated and ask out. However, even if that ends up becoming true, I'm not sure he's really the type of shooter or off-ball player that would fit well alongside LeBron. So I don't love that. This year, there's also been tons of stories coming out of Atlanta about the friction between the organization and Trae Young, but I think this is an even worse fit than SGA. Both Trae Young and LeBron need the ball far too much to coexist. And that gets me to Zach LaVine. He just signed a massive extension in the offseason, and Chicago is sort of stuck in no man's land. Not good enough to make any real noise in the playoffs, but also not bad enough to end up at the top pick. So if Chicago decided to pull the plug, LaVine would be made available, and he would be a really good fit alongside LeBron. He's a really solid three-point shooter, and he can take over games with his scoring in spots. And most importantly, he has a track record of working alongside another perimeter-oriented player in DeMar DeRozan. Zach LaVine is 27, so towards the end of that first LeBron run, he's going to be exiting his prime and nearing retirement. Also, just imagine no-look passes from LeBron to a cutting LaVine for a huge dunk. That would just be a ton of fun. So let's take some of those draft picks that we acquired from our year of tanking and maybe a few of our own, and let's go out and get Zach LaVine to co-star alongside LeBron. The second guy I have my eye on, and this is if things don't work out with LaVine, or maybe this Minnesota experiment is just such an epic failure that the Wolves get really desperate to move off of Karl Anthony Towns. He, like LaVine, is 27 years old, so he's on our initial timeline. Fit-wise, this is honestly a match made in heaven. Since Town is a big guy, he's not going to need the ball a lot, and he's one of, if not the best shooting big man in NBA history, so that's perfect for LeBron. And Towns, one of his biggest weaknesses is his defense, but A peak LeBron James was just a menace as an off-ball defender and a rim protector. So I think he can cover. LeBron could cover us well enough to make up for Towns' deficiencies defensively. And like I said, depending on how bad this Minnesota thing gets, that Towns contract might be viewed as one of the worst in the league in a few years. So it might not take much to acquire him. And I know Towns and Levine is just sort of meh as a core, but skill set wise, they fit really well alongside LeBron. And that's way better than anything LeBron had during that first Cleveland run. The rest of the roster, we can just get creative with some mid-level signings through free agency. And teams are always giving out bad contracts to shooters and then almost immediately trying to get out of them. So we can use that to our advantage. If you think about guys today like Davis Bertans, Duncan Robinson, Evan Fournier, they're pretty much free for the taking for anyone who wants them. And they would fit really well alongside a roster led by LeBron. So it may be even trading for guys like that. We could also squeeze out a pick or two out of those teams to help them get off of those contracts. And then also, even a young LeBron James was able to entice veterans to join the team who were just looking for one last shot at the title. Draft pick wise, after that first year, I would be going scorched earth, be willing to trade any and every draft pick except for the ones where LeBron leaves for the first time. I'm going to hold on to those at all costs. So the core of the team is going to be young LeBron, Zach LaVine, and Karl Anthony Towns. Then to round out the roster with some of those overpaid shooters on bad contracts that I mentioned, and use the remainder of my cap room to go out and get a 3-and-D guy here and there. And then we can round out the roster with some veterans who are just looking for one last title run. Also, since basketball has moved to more of a positionless style, I think I would use that freedom to just go big on the wing, really embrace being a big team. When you have LeBron, you don't really need a traditional point guard, so I would use that flexibility to double down on just having a bunch of big wings and hopes that helps us become a better defensive team. And I honestly do feel that a young LeBron with a peak Zach LaVine, peak Karl Anthony Towns, I think they could absolutely rattle off a title or two. It's a core that fits together and makes sense. You got three guys who are capable of going for 30 or even 40 on any given night. And whatever deficiencies that Towns has defensively can absolutely be made up for by a prime LeBron roaming the paint. And then once we are getting closer to that LeBron leaving for Miami, Karl Anthony Towns and LaVine will be exiting their prime, and we can use that to really bottom out in those 4 years, aka the Miami years, where we no longer have LeBron. And that's exactly what I would do. I would just tear everything down to the studs and just try to be as bad as possible for the next 4 years. Trade everything of any value to get more future picks that can be used for trades when LeBron returns. We held on to our own draft picks for those 4 years, and all four we would likely be near the bottom of the league, so looking at a top draft pick, unless we look into another generational prospect, which honestly would be even better. So when LeBron returns after those 4 years in Miami, I think it's safe to say we would have at least one player that we can build around, similar to Kyrie, if not 2 or 3. That Cleveland group didn't really completely bottom out the way they could have, and they also missed on some draft picks. So if we're smarter in the draft, we could absolutely be looking at 2 or 3 future building block type players. The next thing we're going to do in those 4 years is similar to what the Miami Heat did when they assembled their big three. We're just going to kind of use those 4 years to plan to have as much cap room as possible for that offseason when LeBron becomes a free agent and can come back to us. LeBron is well liked by players around the league today, and guys are always wanting to team up with him. So maybe we can sign some of his friends or trade for other superstars and assemble a big three type situation. The way that the Cavs handled LeBron's return in real life was pretty well perfect in terms of the plan that they had. They held on to Kyrie because they knew he could be a star. They used young guys like Dion Waiters to acquire veterans who could help them win now. And then they used guys like Anthony Bennett and Andrew Wiggins to go out and get another star like Kevin Love. So my plan is very similar to what Cleveland did. We're going to hold on to a lot of cap room so that we can maybe sign another star player alongside LeBron when he comes back, like he did with Cleveland. And then we're going to throw in some of those young assets and all those draft picks we acquired to potentially get another star the way that they did with Kevin Love. And then for the rest of those 4 years, those last 4 years with LeBron, I'm throwing picks and caution to the wind. We're going all in on those years and trying to win as much as possible. And that's kind of the way I would handle it, I think. And in retrospect, I think Cleveland did a really poor job during the first LeBron stint, getting him the help that he needed to win a championship. But in the second run, they did a pretty good job setting things up and kind of planning for that future, even if the execution towards the end wasn't the greatest. So I think if we could take the lessons from the past and combine it with the hindsight that we have today, we could easily eclipse the one title that LeBron won in Cleveland. And we're likely going to end up with more than the 4 that he has in his career today. LeBron's longevity will never be replicated, and his ability to raise the floor of any team into a playoff contender allows you to weather injuries or any other drama that can come out throughout a season. And if we could take advantage of that 4-year window where he leaves for Miami and use that to retool and set things up for that last 4-year run, LeBron has a very strong case to be the best player ever to build a dynasty around.